All right. You are listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com to see the many different shirts we offer, including this great Roberto Guerrero shirt I have on. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee. Our other co-host, you may have seen him walking out of a great clips with a big old smile on his face. You've seen him at a dirt track. He is the man, the myth, the legend, Scott Bowie.
Hello, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing well, Scott. How are you?
Actually, I'm doing really well. It's been an interesting weekend, but we're heading into a new week. Things are looking good.
Right, and kind of on a sad note, definitely the whole racing family is really not the same today. I don't think they'll ever be the same. We lost Bobby Unser.
Yeah, how about that, right? Man, there has never been a Bobby Unser before, and there'll never be a Bobby Unser after. He hard racer. Man told you how he saw it. In a good way, though. I mean, he wasn't demonstrative. He just had great stories, but he had this ability to just tell you what he thought.
Yeah, one time I always think of this one story. So one time I met him at an autograph signing, and I had a photo from Pikes Peak Hill Climb. And he was talking about the photo, and I was like, what do you think? And I kind of knew like this would kind of get a reaction out of him, or he would kind of get going about the story. But I was like, well, what do you think about the electric car holding the record? And that got him fired up. He was like, oh, you're going to get me going, and you're going to get me fired up. But he was talking about, real funny, he was talking about when they actually paved the hill climb, and I forget do you know the reason why, Scott, why they paved it? It was something with the
I really don't.
It's something with the rocks falling or something. But anyway, he said when they did that, he goes, I paid my money, I flew there, I had something to say, and I said it. And that, I think that really well sums up Bobby. You know, if he had something to say, he said it.
Oh yeah, he didn't hold back. You know, that's what made him so good when he did the IndyCar broadcast. And you know, this is a man that I had very small interactions with, but he always had. You know, the funny thing about Bobby, man, he always had a smile on his face. Always, you know, he may be telling you how it was, but he was also laughing and joking. And man, boy, when he was a driver, though, smart. He and Dan Gurney together were a deadly combination. You know, they jumped up the record 17 mile an hour in 1 year with the introduction of the Gurney flap, and just, you know, we're losing that era slowly, which makes me very sad.
Right.
But at least with today's technologies, we can go out and find Bobby stories on YouTube or, you know, podcasts. And Dinner with Racers did a great cartoon with them. You can see it on Amazon Prime. It's brilliant work. So if anybody wants to really hear Bobby tell some stories and see it reenacted, that is a great way to see it.
Absolutely.
But again, just sad that we don't get a chance to hear him just tell these stories again, you know.
Right, and I'll kind of close on Bobby Unser on this note. And so to be honest, like we probably wouldn't even be doing the podcast if it wasn't for Bobby Unser, because when I kind of look at kind of the trajectory of things, so about a couple. Well, I think it's been a year now. I had the opportunity to design some Bobby Unser shirts. And his wife and himself were, I mean, they couldn't have been more gracious. They were, you know, super cool. They just wanted some shirts. And I really needed an avenue to really sell the shirts under. And then that's where the whole Race 92 idea came out of. And then from there, you know, came up with some different ideas with my business partner, Jacob. And that's kind of where the whole podcast thing kind of came into realm. So if it really wasn't for Bobby Unser, we may not be sitting here right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember when I remember talking to your dad when you first started doing that, and then it's funny to just see it kind of mushroom from there. And talking about for people who don't realize this, Bobby Unser was like all the Unsers, brilliant at Pikes Peak Hill Climb, as Aaron mentioned, and Parnelli Jones took a real liking to Bobby, and he convinced Bobby to come back to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He said, "You've got what it takes," and Bobby said, "I don't have what it takes to run there." And the Unsers had already been there. It's not like Bobby was the first one, and he said, he's like, I don't have what it takes. And he goes, "I'm telling you, you got what it takes." Convinces him to come back, convinces him to go talk with Granatelli, and I'm sure Parnelli had something to say to Granatelli too, and he gets him in the Novi, and then they weren't going to really let Bobby run, and then he went down and talked to, I believe it was Harlan Bangler. Parnelli told Harlan that, yes, you're going to let Bobby run. You're going to let him take his test. And that's how Bobby Unser comes to the Speedway. So big thank you to Parnelli Jones for believing in Bobby Unser, that in a crazy way has led to this podcast. And boy, Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Indy 500 would not be the same.
No.
If Bobby Unser hadn't been there.
I don't think racing would have been the same.
Oh, I agree. And obviously we don't know what it would be like if he was never on the scene, but boy, we're lucky he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of that, I'll always owe a debt of gratitude to Bobby Unser and his wife Lisa. So, thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other racing news you want to talk about?
Well, I think we got to talk about Texas a little bit. So obviously, Scott Dixon won the first race, and really it's no surprise there. Ganassi's been fast all year. Dixon's gonna be fast until the day he retires. I don't think Dixon's ever going to slow down.
He's going to slow down long before you and I realize he slowed down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it works with guys at his level. They know it long before we know it. So Scotty D wins the first one. But, man, how about the second one? How about that?
Great to see that kid get his first win. I mean, he's been so close a couple different times. And I know Zach Brown threw out that extra carrot to him. If he won a race, he'd get an F1 test. And that's got to be cool for him, because if you remember, it was a couple years ago. It was a year that Alonso did not make the race. Pato was his teammate, and Pato didn't make the race either. And he just signed a deal with like Red Bull, and the deal was like he was going to end up in F1, if I remember correctly. And then I don't know what happened with that deal, but it kind of fell apart. So I'm sure he still has some aspirations in F1.
I think they said the other day that when he went and ran F3 or something, and then that kind of blew up, and then he went over to Japan and was run over in Japan in the single seaters there, and then he got his opportunity to come back to America and run IndyCar, and again, here's the youth is going to be served here in IndyCar here pretty soon. It's already started. Alex Palou, now Pato, Colton Herta. I mean, it's the changing of the guard is afoot. Again, a little sad, but in another way, the future's bright. I mean, these guys are fast, fearless, and really great personalities. I mean, all the Palou and Herta. Herta's really California laid back, and Palou and Pato were so excited. And Scott McLaughlin runs second. Man, you thought he'd won the race.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sure that's like a win for him.
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, what a great weekend of IndyCar racing, right?
Yeah. I think that kind of hits on the big news stories there. Obviously, we're all saddened by Bobby Unser's death. So, Yeah, like we said, racing is definitely never going to be the same. So the interview we have today, you want to talk a little bit about who
Yeah,
we're interviewing here?
absolutely. And it meant a lot to me. Spike Gehlhausen, if it's not for the Gilhausen family, I'm not sitting here probably today. My dad went to work for the Gilhausens. We were trying to figure out the other day, I think early 60s, late 50s. Spike's dad, Carl, had numerous race cars over the years. And my dad got to be the crew chief. And back then, the crew chief meant you built motors and you fixed them and
Right.
you maintained them. And, you were the doing everything guy. And through that, the Gilhausen family has been like my family. I've never known a day in my life of not knowing Spike Gehlhausen or anybody in his family and his brother Junie, Carl Jr. So it meant a lot to me to have Spike on. Spike's got great stories. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues, but Aaron has done a great job of getting those spliced together. I think people who don't remember Spike are going to really enjoy some of his stories because he come along in racing in the 70s when we were right at the end of the big horsepower era, and with the tabletop wings, and he gets kind of forced into racing, not forced like told you got to do it, but you'll hear the story of how he gets involved and to actually driving Indy cars, and again, I'm just so lucky to be able to get Spike on.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to be able to talk to him.
But yeah, outside of Spike, we have some other Indy 500 drivers we're going to get on soon, so we're definitely really excited about that. And it's kind of good to kind of see our guest list is continuing to grow. So
yeah, I mean we've with the things you've been sharing with me and some of the people we've been able to get to agree. Wow, this is so far. I thought getting guests would be pretty difficult, and it's not easy. Aaron does a lot of work behind the scenes to make it happen, but just glad that people are agreeing to do it and are willing to talk about their lives and their careers and allow us to be able to share it through us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's been pretty humbling to this point for me.
Oh yeah, definitely the same. It's talking to a different person, every time. It really breaks up the monotony of, just a traditional podcast or whatever. And, it's like a totally different experience because you're talking to someone completely different. It's a completely different story. So it definitely, keeps us interested in the interview.
Yeah, and we've had so far with who we've shown and then who we've actually already kind of recorded ahead a little bit. We've so far it's been mostly drivers, and eventually we'll get to more mechanics and owners and that sort of thing. But we're trying to keep it fairly diverse, and I think you're going to see that in some of these coming up. And so it's just, again, it's been humbling to see the people who are willing to do it, and I thank them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So I think without any further ado, we'll go ahead and jump right into the Spike Gehlhausen interview.
This week's guest, special guest for me. He's someone I've known for literally my entire life. Please welcome Spike Gehlhausen. Spike, how you doing?
Pretty good, Scott. I'd like to thank you for the invite here to the Racer podcast and see what this is all about.
How's it going, Spike?
Pretty good, Aaron. How are you? Nice meeting you today again.
Yep. Good to meet you.
Nice.
So, a little background. Spike's family owned race cars. What year did your dad first start racing?
He bought his first midget in 1954, the year I was born.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they obviously started racing in 1954. I'm not sure when Dad come on the scene. Dad came along probably in 60s, right?
Yeah, about 67, 66, maybe.
So my dad went to work for Spike's dad, Carl, and they ran everything. USAC sprint cars, midgets, USAC Silver Crown. What's called Silver Crown today. We call them Champ cars back in the day because they were still part of the championship trail. And and then Spike, like numerous others, became a race car driver himself. And he got to run the Indianapolis 500 a few times. Drove for his dad a little bit there, and he drove for some others. And so Spike, so the year you're born, your dad buys this race car. I mean, what got him interested in racing?
That's that's really a question that we asked him a lot of times, and he never really gave us a straight answer. He said he got messing around with junkers, down at Hopscott a couple of times, and just him and some buddies just happened to do it, and he came across a guy that owned a midget and wanted to sell it, so he bought it. And that's about the length of the story.
No childhood dreams, nothing like that. He just got interested and started doing it.
Yeah, nothing that he ever said. He never, when he was a real young boy, I guess his dad did take him to a sprint car race, I believe at Salem, and that kind of sparked his interest, but it wasn't something he longed to do that I could, that he ever said. So it was more kind of you kind of knew my dad. He was kind of a spur of the moment type guy, and if something struck his fancy, well, he went and he did it. And I think that's what happened here. And then he got bit by the racing bug, and he lasted a long time in it, from 54 to 79. And so he did a lot of racing throughout the country.
Yeah, he first of all, your dad is one of the best men I ever met. He always had this great sense of humor. I personally never ever saw your dad like upset or mad to the point where he was, not easy to get along with. Pretty soon he was laughing and joking. And he had this amazing personality, and he just loved having a great time. He just loved life.
Yeah, I believe that's and that's how he liked to go racing. I believe he liked the fact of going racing more than racing itself. He liked being involved with the racing people and just interacting with those type of people. And of course, there was always little parties on the side. So,
yeah, and what people maybe today, depending on when you come into the sport, today it's a little more business. Even sprint cars and midgets. When the race is over, you load up your giant hauler, and you're off to the car wash, and then you're off to the next race. Back in the time period I can remember, starting for me, early 70s is kind of when I could really kind of my first memories. After the races, a lot of these shows were day shows back then. And after the race, people would stand around and you talk and they'd laugh. And I personally never really ever saw confrontation or really anything like that. Once the races were over, they were over. And then everybody just kind of went off and really enjoyed their kind of kindred spirits. I mean, they were part of like this. I know this is kind of used a lot in racing, but like this family.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was not unusual to be at a place like Salem or Eldora, and the race be over by 5:30, 6, and we wouldn't pull out of there till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
and most of the racers would be there yet that long. They liked one another's company a lot, and you were right. There's very few confrontations after the race back then. Very, very few.
Yeah, and it was a lot different time. Especially when you first bought the cars, the mortality rate for drivers was very high. You didn't have a lot of family with drivers with their kids in the cars. Maybe in the midgets you had a little more, but the sprint cars and that was pretty rare because they didn't like putting their kids in that type of danger.
No, it was definitely a growing man sport then. Back then you had to be 21 to even get in the car and go try anything. You didn't see too many real young people, going to bite the bit to get into a sprint car. they were pretty lethal back in those days.
And speaking of, like, as you mentioned, like, you had to be 21. I remember hearing a story about Mario that I think he like had a fake ID or something so he could race when he came over. I'm sure that happened a lot around you, Spike, right? Like, I'm sure. And it was probably a lot easier to do it back then than obviously it would be now.
Oh yeah, well, actually, when I started racing, I was supposed to be 21, but I was really 16 when I started, and Christ said, Bill Danella, excuse me, always made a joke of it, said I was 21 for 5 years before. And if actually the first time I got into a champ car, I was still only 20. So it was a pretty young time back in those days. I mean, but it was a lot different when I started from when, 10 years before that. Cars were a lot different, a lot safer. So, and that's why I think in today's world that, you see 14-year-old kids driving sprint cars. So, it's changed a tremendous amount.
So when did you actually realize that you wanted to be a race car driver? I'm guessing that you used to be with your dad all the time when he raced, and you just decided you enjoyed it, or?
Yeah. Well, we had actually go-karts, quarter midgets, you name it, anything with a motor we had in the house. I mean, At one time my dad had I believe it was 10 race cars. We were running, campaigning all at the same time. And so from Thursday night until Monday morning, that was racing weekend, and we spent it as a family going to a racetrack. So it was kind of hard not to like the sport because, you spent probably 40 weekends out of the 52 at a racetrack. And it was a great time to grow up in racing, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. It was a marvelous experience.
But it was such a, I hate to make it sound like this. It was such a free time for young people, because really, the war was over with the time your dad got that car, and there was a boom period, and there was a baby boomer kids, and they were growing up, and it was just like this free spirit. It seemed like that like this can-do attitude. I'm going to go out and do something. And like when you and my brother Bill would go racing, I mean, you guys would take that midget, and you were 16, and he was 14, maybe?
Yeah, he was 14, 15. I mean, Bill's about a little over a year younger than me. But, we started at Springfield, Illinois, at Shahane's place there when I was 16 and he was 15. And we were the only ones there. I mean, your dad, Eddie, didn't come over. My dad wasn't there. My mom was in the grandstands back in the back straightaway. She wouldn't even come down to the pits. So we were just on our own. It's kind of the way they did things back then. Dad kind of just said, here's the midget. You guys go take care of it. Go run it. Figure out how to get there. Figure out how to get home. And have fun. And so we took off. We did that. And actually, I always think today, I ran 4 races before my dad ever come and watched me run. So it was, I don't know what that was about with him, but he wouldn't come the first 4. So
if there was a slogan that they could have had back then, that they, everybody puts a slogan on the shop wall today, right?
Yeah,
like today, someone refused to lose. If there was a slogan that would have been on the shop walls, it would have been "Figure it out."
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because that was their answer to everything. That was my dad's answer. Your dad's answer was "Figure it out."
Figure it out. They'd help you a little bit, but then to a point they turn around and had to do something else, and you're on your own. And so that's kind of the way they grew up, and I believe that's the only way they understood the way the world works. And you're right. Your dad, Eddie, was really that way of figuring it out. I mean, I don't know how many times Bill would go to him and ask him questions. And, he'd give him some kind of answer, but it wouldn't be an exactly thing. It'd be about 80% there, and he'd make us figure out the last 20. So,
like even if the truck broke down, he'd call, "Hey, what do I do to Figure it out.
Yeah, trailer bearings go out. Yeah, we had it all happen to us. Those days cars weren't quite as reliable, and trailers weren't reliable. My dad kind of believed more in quantity over. Don't take this wrong. I'd say quantity over quality, because he had 10 race cars, and it's not like they were junky race cars. They were very good race cars, but they weren't brand new race cars.
Right.
They were all older cars, 4 years, 5 years older, so forth. And he just liked to have race cars, I think. He
loved it.
Loved to have the masses.
Yeah.
And,
I remember those cars would either be in Jasper or some would be in Jasper and some would be at Dad's shop there in Sparta. And
right.
Man, you'd walk into Dad's shop there, especially when you had the Indy cars, and be race cars everywhere.
Yeah, pieces and everything is hanging everywhere.
So,
yeah.
A kind of a neat thing about your dad, and I couldn't find the list. You guys had a list. You and your brother kind of presented that, did a presentation on your dad's racing team and his racing career, which I thought was so great. It was over at Sarah Fisher's, and you had a list of all the drivers that had driven for him, and it was 56 or something like that.
Yeah, it was 50 drivers.
50, and some of the names were just absolute legends. And,
yeah.
Some of them were legendary for a lot of other reasons too, but some of them were legendary race car drivers. And
what do you think were some of the most legendary names on that list?
We had Eddie Sachs.
Oh wow.
AJ Foy drove for him. Eddie Sachs, Rex Easton, just to name a couple. Tom Sneva, Speedway winner. Heck, you go down through the list. I mean, and then like a little bit unknowns. You had like Buzz Gregory drove for us.
Right.
A lot of times, a lot of people don't remember him, but he was pretty popular around in the '60s. And Jim Bob Lubert, if you guys, I know Scott knows Jim Bob.
For anybody, Jim Bob used to own Speedway Monogram, which was across the street from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So that's where people would know Jim Bob from. If you went in there, that was his place, and he ran that for probably 30 years or so.
Oh, yeah, every bit of. And we had, I don't know, Sam Sessions, you name him, anybody that drove race cars in the 60s, somewhere eventually ended up driving for Dad.
Oh, wow.
Somewhere along the line.
Yeah, so you start with the midget, and then I think, what would you say did he have a favorite type of race car?
Nope.
Didn't.
He just liked to, I think he just liked to compete. I think it ended up, his favorite ended up being the Speedway car, because he liked the competition of the Speedway cars. When we started finally running and getting the cars qualified up in the front and started running with the guys, he was in his glory years. I mean, he loved to walk around and agitate Roger and Pat Patrick and because they're spending $1 million. My dad's spending maybe, Christ, if we spent $100,000, it was a ton of money. I mean, we weren't even close to their budgets. But yeah, he had a 4-year-old Eagle, and we were sticking her up there in the first 2-3 rows most of the time, and it was a pretty neat time. He enjoyed it tremendously. He also enjoyed the sprint car time with Tom Sneva.
Yeah,
rear sprint car.
And that was an amazing run. USAC's rules allowed that rear engine sprint car, and you guys took that. What was it, Huffaker or Gerhardt? Huffaker. You had two of them.
Huffaker. Yeah.
Huffaker is the one that was more successful because it had the Chevy in it, and took that old Indy car. And was it Watson that built a cage for it? I think Watson built the cage for it.
Yeah, either Watson or it was Willie Davis. I kind of think.
Oh, yeah, I think Dad said it was Watson, but it may have been Willie. And man, that one season they let it run, it hurt a lot of feelings.
That thing was just an awesome car, and the funniest thing is, the only thing we did to change that thing from a Speedway car to a sprint car was we had to chop off about 6 inches off the nose, and we had to chop off about 4 inches off the rear header. The headers coming up the back to get the legal length, and that's all we touched. That's the only thing we did to it, except for putting in the legal size motor, a 302, back
right.
then. So
Right. I always remember hearing that story about AJ Foy. I think it was and I'm sure you know, Scott, I think it was a dirt midget that he took to Milwaukee, and I don't think he won. He finished in the top 5, didn't he?
Well, that Silver Crown Champ car, he crashed or whatever, the rear engine car, right? And he went up to Milwaukee and he sat on the pole and ran second, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Remember that?
With his dirt car.
Yeah, with his dirt car. Yeah.
With his dirt car. Yeah.
So, he's doing this, and you're seeing all these famous drivers, and at that point, were you thinking to yourself, man, I just can't wait? Or was it just something you were around?
No. To be honest with you, it was just something I was around. When I was very young, I mean, we talked earlier about the lethal attitude of the sprint cars, how they were so lethal. And drivers would come and go. And some weekend, you'd have this guy driving for you, and next weekend, so it was somebody else. So really, up until like Tom Bigelow drove for us, we didn't have what you would call a longevity driver. I mean, Dad was picking up guys that were hot at the time, and back then, guys could run midget sprint cars, dirt cars, champ dirt cars. So they were running everything. And it was difficult in the old days to have somebody locked up for a solid year. I mean, through injury or even through other races. So in any given year, we might have had 4 or 5 different guys driving sprint car or a midget. Except I guess Bob Winnie was probably the longest that ever drove a midget, except for myself, for my father. Bob drove, I think, 3 or 4 years for Dad. And then Tom Bigelow drove, 7, 8 years, I believe.
Yeah.
And so they were the 2 the longest. And, but back then, again, it wasn't, longevity wasn't sticking with one team. It was getting the best ride you could get as a driver, move on, move around. And the car owners had the same attitude, it was getting the best driver for this racetrack. You might pick somebody to run Salem. You might try to get Eddie Sachs or AJ to run Salem. And then when you go to Terre Haute, Dad would call up maybe Rex Easton to come over and run, or any given number of those guys back in that day. And so it was real specialty type. You were looking for a special driver to fit that racetrack. And that was more of a concern than the longevity side. That's the way I observed it in my younger years. As far as it be making me want to become a driver, I was around it so much, I guess wanting to be a race driver was just a natural thing. It just came natural. Something I wanted to do. When I got old enough to run quarter midgets and go-karts and stuff, we did a little of that. And then we just moved on from there, just kept going on.
So when you originally started out, what would you say your initial racing goals were? Were they to race in the Indy 500, or did you have other goals?
Be honest with you, I never really pushed any goal out there.
You just wanted to race.
It's everybody's dream to run Indy 500. But when I first sat in a midget, I never thought, well, I'm going to get to run Indy someday. That thought never entered my mind. And it really never entered my mind until in 75, when my dad didn't ask me, he said, look, he says, either you're going to run the car at Milwaukee, this champ car, or it's going up for sale, and I'm getting out of the champ car business. So that's how I got initiated into running the champ car. I had no desire. I mean, I had plenty of desire. That's not the right term, but I had no thought process of going to my dad and saying, let me run Milwaukee. He came to me and said, either you're running it or we're quitting. Because he had just missed the Speedway for I believe the 5th time, and he was highly disappointed, and he was just tired of champ car racing because he couldn't afford to do it the right way. He couldn't afford to run the right way at that time.
He bought what year did he get his first Indy car?
We bought that when we bought the Huffaker for Tom Bigelow, and that would have been probably 69, 70. Something like that. And then he bought that Gerhardt in 71, I believe, or 72. No, I'm sorry, I'm way off. That Huffaker was like 71 or 72, and he bought the Gerhardt in 75 because Jerry Carl drove the Gerhardt. Yeah, I'm messing up. Jerry Carl drove the Gerhardt at Indy in 72. So I think I was right. I was right initially. 69, 70 for the Huffaker. 71, 72 for the Gerhardt. Well, we bought the Kingfish in 73. And then ran it at the Speedway and ran different races. Bigelow drove it. Oh, God. Arnie Knepper drove it. And Sneva drove it.
Yeah.
It had a lot of different shoes in it, off and on, run races here and there. One of the reasons Dad got into the Champ Car business is that at that time, you could get, if you had owned a Champ Car, you could get free Sprint Car tires, free Midget tires, free Champ Car tires. You could get all the fuel that you could haul, and you just got a lot of extra things when you were in the Champ Car stuff. So that was one of the reasons Dad went to the Champ Car back with Bigelow back in the late 60s, and then continued on. But we bought the Kingfish in 73, campaigned that up, and like I said, up until 76. In 76, we bought a McLaren from Lindsey Hopkins. Campaigned that for 2 years, and we bought the Eagles from Bob Fletcher. Bought a pair of Eagles. Campaigned those till 79, and that was pretty well the end of it. My dad had to retire in 79 because he had a stroke.
So so Dad comes up to you. What you told me is that you were cleaning the fuel tanks. You had cleaned the fuel tanks at Speedway, and people don't realize, they see these nice aluminum tanks now. Well, back then there were steel tanks that held 70 gallons or something like that. I mean, ridiculous.
Oh, they were humongous tanks, huge.
And they were steel, so every year when you used them, you had to clean them out. Somebody had to get in them.
Right. Get inside them with a wire brush and steel wool and clean them out.
Because most of them were stored at Speedway, right? People just leave them there.
Yeah, just leave them there. We never owned one, so we'd walk around and find one that's been sitting there for a while and call the owner and see if we could borrow it. And so you borrow it, take the side off, and then the littlest, youngest person around was always elected to get inside that thing and clean it out. And for some reason, I was always the littlest, youngest one around. So I cleaned that out about 3 times. Man, that was a deal. And then last time I cleaned that out was at Pocono. And actually, I had run the Champ Car at Milwaukee the race before, finished 10th. Went to Pocono, felt it was too big of a racetrack, didn't want to run it. So we had Jerry Sneva driving for us. And eventually, Jerry Carl drove the carts at Pocono. But we started with Jerry Sneva. Anyhow, I had to clean the tank out for that race. And that was it. I crawled out of that thing and I said, that's it. No more am I crawling inside these fuel tanks. It's over. So
were you actually 21 the first year you ran Speedway?
I ran Speedway. I was 21.
You were.
I was legally 21.
Legally 21.
Right. And that was 76, right?
That was 76.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I said, but I was 20 in Milwaukee the year before in 75.
Okay. Now, you get this McLaren, and this is truly a high watermark, really, for this team, because you got the motor and you got some really good motors with it, and everything looked like it was going to be a couple years of racing, and kind of tell the people what that May was like in 76.
Well, that May was unbelievable. We brought the McLaren out. We had run the Kingfish at Trenton the race before. Came into the Speedway, and got the McLaren ready, got it all running, really looking good. Went out, we ran a rookie test, did all that in one day. Was one of the first ever to do every phase of the rookie test one day. Completed it, passed it, and then started running. And we lost a motor, and like that Monday, I believe, first weekend we did our rookie test, the first Sunday, and then that Monday we lost an engine, so we rebuild one. Next day we lose an engine. We did come to the Speedway with 6 complete engines and enough pieces to build 2 more. So we came basically with 8 engines, and was just when the 19-degree motor had come out, 19-degree offie, and but we had some 36 degree, I believe.
I'm not good at that. Bill knows all that. I'm not good at that.
We had 36s, we had 19s. 19 was the new one, I know that. But we had a little of both. But anyhow, we ended up blowing every motor we had, and we would spin a rod, and we would blow them within 2 laps. Go out, warm it up, go down the front straightaway, blow the engine by the time I got to turn 1. And we went through our entire inventory, and the only way I got any speed at all, we put the engine in that we had run Trenton with, and it had the Trenton race on it, 250 miles plus practice. And so we used that to get up to speed, and eventually we got a motor to last long enough. We got enough practice in, and we got qualified for the race. And then come race day, coming down for the green flag, lost oil pressure, lost another motor, green flag of the race. So it was a very disappointing race day for us. But the month of May was we ended up finding out what it was. It was a pickup tube in the oil tank that somebody had changed along the road down the pass. And for some reason, just at Indianapolis, and I mean Indianapolis is the only racetrack we had this problem at. And it must have been the configuration of the racetrack along with the degree of the banking or whatever, but it would create a vortex in the oil tank and it would suck air, and we would burn a bearing out. And we changed the pickup in the oil tank the following year after we lost 2 or 3 motors again, and figured out what it was finally and changed that. But it was a very exciting but yet very frustrating month of May for us in '76. People ask me what was my favorite year, and I always come back easy. It was 1976, and the one reason was because it was the first year my father made the race. Right. He had tried for 5 years previous to that, and it was the first time him and Eddie and the whole clan, the group of us, got in the show. And we didn't get to run much of the race, but we made it into the race, and it was an exciting time, and it's probably be a very memorable. It'd be the one thing I remember until the day I die, because it meant a lot to me and to the family, and just to see Eddie's face and to see Dad's face when I came in after qualifying was worth all the trouble in the world.
And I think something important that a lot of people, especially people my generation, don't realize, like how many cars tried to make the race, back in the 70s and 80s and before then. I'm looking at the list right now, and there were, I think, 17 or 18 cars that did not qualify. So, that's definitely quite the feat just to qualify for the race back then. I mean, there's many guys who never qualified. Guys like Jiggers Royce, I think Ralph Ligori, they tried. One of them tried like 10 times, and to say that you raced the Indy 500 5 times, it's definitely quite the accomplishment.
It's as we said earlier, it's totally different today. Back then, it was. Right. I mean, it was nothing to have 50 race cars competing for the 33 spots. Mm-hmm. That was pretty common. Up in 1980, I believe there was 103 entries. And I believe 90 race cars actually got on the racetrack. So, made it pretty tough. You had to get a lot of running done, or you had to get your running done fast and quick. You didn't want to spend a lot of time on the racetrack because burning up equipment, and just because the massive amount of cars on the racetrack, it was always difficult to run good and run fast back in those days, in practice times. You had to be very careful.
Yeah. And that was the one thing I always felt was so unfair to your career. Was as great as 76 was in some ways, it really hurt in the long run. Just because it's hard to overcome that kind of financial devastation. It's and then but it's so funny. Mom talked about qualifying. She was talking about Dad crying.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's unlike today's world. There wasn't a shop somewhere building engines, shipping it to them. We'd run in the daytime. If we lost an engine, we'd pull it out, rebuild it that night, or rebuild another motor that night, slip her in, and run the next day. And that's just the way it was back then.
Yeah.
You basically, they said the month of May, and when I started running there, it was 3 weeks of May. They cut out the first week, and but I'm going to tell you what, it's the longest 3 weeks of your life, because there were just a lot of nights you spent all night in that gasoline alley, plugging a motor in or doing whatever you had to do.
It's just it's hard for me to understand because I didn't go through it. I know about it. I just can't imagine because it's a pressure cooker, man. Once you're there, I mean, you're all in.
Yeah.
So
you're all in.
You're all in, and it's really, for at least that moment in time, it's the world. It's everything.
Yeah, it meant everything, and you do some funny things to get done what you have to get done at that. Back in those days at that place.
Right.
So, I mean, it was a great time for the Speedway, and I think those years is what's made the Speedway what it is today. And that's really, when, people talk about the history of the Speedway, I think you have to look at the 60s and the 70s.
Oh, absolutely.
And early 80s as the maximum, the glory years, I call them. Because I think that's when they had the most race cars, and they had just, it was just an overall struggle. For most people at that time.
And it's really that thing of overcoming. Like not only you're working to achieve something, maybe Roger Penske and them had a completely different circumstance, right? And they had the resources. But when you're talking about teams like yours, and it wasn't just yours, it was the Hoffmans, other people along that, I can't think of all.
You got Passy Vadas, and there was a lot of small teams back in those days.
And I mean, for them, it's not only are you racing wanting the win, but I mean, it's the sheer fact of making the race and overcoming all those obstacles.
Yeah, it's when we used to go to Speedway, the first thing you had to do was make the race. I mean, that was it, number one, and really, I look back on it, and making the race is the important thing. Whatever happened in the race itself, that was going to be a secondary of the month. For us as a small team, it meant everything to make that race, because we needed that money to go the rest of the year. And so it was a pressure cooker of all pressure cookers. I mean, that place can really put it to you. And as you know, Scott, that place will bite you. It will do some of the craziest things to a car, to people, and make some people be out there.
You make it in 76, and it spins a bearing, and you're co-rookie of the year, right?
Right.
Who was that? Who's the other rookie? Was it right?
Chupan.
Vern Chupan.
Vern Chupan.
Okay. Yeah. And then I don't remember, this timeline is so fuzzy to me for some reason. Did you make it in 77?
No, I missed it in 77. We spun on the last day of qualifying and barely got into the fence, but got into it enough to keep us from repairing it and getting back out. And so we missed it in 77.
In 78.
78, we bought the Eagles, and we had the Eagles. We started running 78. I made it for Dad. And then John Mailer made it, and we had two cars in it, which was a glory thing, for my dad, getting
Sure.
2 cars in the Speedway. And then 79, was my dad had a stroke, and it was a political battle of 79 between USAC and CART, and all that went on with that deal. I ended up driving for Pat Patrick in 79, and we tried to have Bill also tried qualifying our car on that extra qualifying session they made because of the law, the rule breaking and so forth. And he ended up putting it in the fence and tearing it up. And so in 79, my dad didn't get in the race. So.
And that's a story we got to leave on the table for political reasons.
Yeah, we don't want to get into that.
Yeah, we can't get into that one. There, a lot behind the scenes on that one, but
it was a terrible year for the Speedway. I think.
Yeah,
I always feel
right.
Well, we don't want to upset some of the powers that be with what really went on there, but
yeah, that's true. That is true.
But anyway, so 79. Now I did. So how did the deal with Patrick come about? Because I'm just fuzzy because I was so young.
Well, it was part of the CART USAC war, and in 79 I had qualified my dad's car. First weekend of qualifying, first Saturday we qualified. We were safe by all practice speeds. We were, I think, like 18th or 19th, and we felt we were more than safe in the field. Everything was fine. And then, if you recall, they started messing with the pop-off valves and all the rule breaking going on. And people that couldn't run within 5 mile an hour of us earlier in the week was all of a sudden running 5 mile an hour faster than we were, and we had qualified. And so we kept watching it, and come the last day of qualifying, we just figured out that there was too many cars, and my cars were not going to make. I wasn't going to make the race. I was going to get bumped, and so I went to Pat and asked Pat, if I could run his third car. He had Gordy and he had Wally and 2 other cars, and Pat said, yeah. So he pushed the car out there, and I thought I was going to get some practice laps. So the first time I ever got to drive a Cosworth, I'd always just driven Offenhausers, turbocharged. And they pushed me off. I got 3 warm-up laps and 4 qualifying laps, and was fast enough to do it. But people, I've had guys come up and ask me, said, when's the first time you ran flat out at the Speedway? I said, can you remember? I says, I can tell you exactly where I made up my mind and I was not going to lift. I said, and it was 1979. It was my second lap of qualifying. I was coming down the front straightaway, and as I was coming down the straightaway, I saw the times it gave me, and I was about 1 mile an hour too slow. And I said, and I had what we always call, you have your meeting with Jesus going down the front straightaway. We had a little discussion, and before I got to turn 1, I made up my mind that I wasn't going to lift, and I just hauled her on down in there. And it stuck, and we came around and finished the rest of the laps and had more than enough speed to make the race. So it was good. And then we ran the whole race, finished 10th in Pat's car, which we thought was all right. We really should have finished 8th that year. But because of some pit stops and things in the pits, we lost 2 spots. But that's the way it was. It was okay. And we went on.
That's I remember when Allsup crashed, I was there, and he was way fast enough to make it.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting there, even as a 9-year-old, and all of a sudden you hear it spin, and then they come over the speaker, and you're just devastated. Yeah, I was just devastated. I just couldn't believe. And I'm at Blaming Bill. That's what happens there.
That's it. We tried to get him to go down because he only had to run like 185, but he was running 189.
Yeah, at least 189.
Yeah, and maybe a little quicker. I don't remember the exact numbers anymore. But and to Bill's credit, he says, "Look, it was a race car. I went out to do what I had to do."
That's right.
Okay, and so it's the way it is. It's the way it worked at the Speedway, and we wish we'd had one in there, but we didn't.
So yeah, and I remember, like I said, in '79 was the first race I got to watch in person, and I just remember when it was over, back at your parents' house there off McCrae. Your dad loved to party. And he loved a reason to have some sort of party. And, man, that was a good one that night. He was just so happy. And,
he was pretty ecstatic, but it was a good time. It was a wonderful time to be involved. And I have to always thank Pat for the ride to give me that, to keep me in the field. So it all worked out well.
Now, did you finish the season in '79 with your dad's stuff, or were you guys done right then?
No, I ran one more race for Dad. I ran Michigan. No, I take that back. I ran Michigan and I ran Trenton, New Jersey, but I really finished the year out with Bob Fletcher. I took over the ride with Bob, ran about 4 races for Bob in '79, and then continued with him in '80.
And I remember. Now did Michigan? Is that where the crash with Al Senior happened?
Yes.
Was it that year? Was it '79?
'78.
78.
It was in '78. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of tell people about that. Because people got to remember they had Armco at Michigan at the time. It was not even a concrete fence. It was Armco.
Armco. Yeah. And it's
what's Armco?
It's
steel barrier.
Yeah, just steel, like the corrugated steel.
Like you see on the highway.
You mean there was no safer barrier, Scott?
No.
Oh no, I would call that an unsafer barrier.
Yeah,
that'd be the way I'd describe it.
Yeah, Armco was, it was pretty to look at, but that's about all it was good for. But anyhow, in '78 at Michigan, we had qualified 4th, and Dad's Eagle was running very well in the race. Was running 4th, and going into turn 3, we lost an engine. And the rod came out the side and cut the oil filter and blew the right rear tire out, entering turn 3. And Al was behind me, probably about 50 yards, and got into my mess and was spinning behind me. But my car spun, and right at turn 4, it nosed into the Armco with the front end of the car, and actually split the Armco, the 2 rails, in half. And I was getting ready to go through the fence. And I can remember, as I say, I can sit here and visually see the fence splitting and coming up the front of the race car. And right before I actually exited the racetrack, Al had been spinning behind me and his nose came in and hit me in the right front and knocked me out of the fence and knocked me down into the inside of the racetrack. So actually, I can credit to this day that, Al actually kept me from going through the fence. Whether I'd have survived it or not, I don't know, but I'm glad I didn't have to test it. I'm glad I didn't have to go through. And ended up breaking my leg, but not a major fracture at all. We just kind of ace bandaged it up and went on racing the next weekend. And so it was quite a horrendous crash and destroyed the race car. I mean, just totally destroyed it, which was a shame. It was probably one of the finest Eagles that was ever produced. It was the one that Bobby ran California, won the race the year before with for Fletcher. And it was a very, very good race car. So I'm still sad to today to see that one had to go away.
And that's so then that really kind of just finishes that era off for you, and now you're kind of right hopping. Before we jump forward, there is one other story I think you told me about Michigan, about a mirror stuck in the draft.
Oh yeah, that's pretty funny, really. That was back in '76.
Yeah, and share with the people what you saw, what it was.
Yeah,
and
I was coming down the back straightaway at Michigan and entered turn 3, and about 50 yards in front of me was Larry Dixon in a McLaren also. And I was driving the McLaren at that time. And so as we were going through turns 3 and 4, I kind of came underneath him and was going to let the car just get its head and drift up, get in his draft, and then pass him going down the front straightaway. So as I was letting the car get its head and getting its draft and coming up, and as I got up probably within 10 yards of his rear wing, I look up and I see this mirror, and this mirror is disconnected from his race car and it's floating above him. And it's just sitting there and it's just tumbling. Now we're running probably 185, 187, something like that. And it just sits there now, and it amazes me, and it amazed me so much that I actually lifted off the gas and just stayed in his draft and followed him. And this thing, we got down about halfway down the straightaway before it got enough air to get out of the draft. And when it did, that thing came back and it punched me right in the middle of the forehead in the helmet. And I said, that was really dumb, but, to stay there and follow. But it was just fascinating to see this thing sit there in the turbulence in the dead airspace of a race car running that fast, and just was dragging along.
I'm sure it was fascinating until it hit you in the head.
Oh, yeah. And it hit me so fast. I did it.
Right.
It was 1 second it was floating on Larry's car, and the next second it hit me. Next quarter of a second. It was so quick, so fast. And, but it didn't hurt anything. It just banged off the top of my head and we went on. It was pretty interesting, I tell you.
Oh, I bet. There's a story at Indy, and I think a long time ago I read, I think it was in Janet Guthrie's book. She was talking about when drivers first race at Indy, some of them would take a spoon and tape it to their side pod. So when they go through the sword chute, if they're not scraping the spoon on the wall, they're not close enough or whatever. Did you ever hear anything like that?
That's a new one. No, I never heard that. No, that's I never heard that story. So
you watch it seems like the cars now, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with different setups. They don't really get that close to the wall, but you look at you guys back in the 70s and 80s. You guys are pretty close to that wall, right?
Yeah. Well, you have to understand, in the 70s, we were running flat bottom race cars.
Right.
They had no ground effects, no nothing. To give you the difference ideas, and I'm sure as you guys know, in my McLaren that I ran at the Speedway, we ran about 800 pounds front springs and about 600-pound rear springs. Now, that's on a 1,500-pound race car. That was about a normal spring rate. When I went there in a ground effects car, when I finally ran a full ground effects car, we were running 3,500-pound front springs and 3,000-pound rear springs. So, because the car was doubling its weight by suction. Now, what you have to understand, to make a flat bottom car without all that downforce fast, you have to let the car have its head. You have to let the car run as free as possible. In other words, at the Speedway, there's long straightaways, but I would always make the straightaways as long as possible. I wouldn't turn in until my right front got right at the gray area. And then I turn in and hit the apex. And then as soon as I hit the apex, you give the car its head and just let it come out to the fence. And you'd let it come out, and it was nothing to white wall a tire, to come out and get up to the fence close enough you'd white wall the tire and go on, because you had to use the whole racetrack.
Right.
Ground effects cars, they don't care. If it's asphalt, it's good. And there's not in today's world, you sit there and you watch, nobody runs a groove. The groove is anywhere on the racetrack. All you have to do is stay out of the junk, the rubble, the marbles, all that stuff, the dirt, but that makes the groove is anywhere on the racetrack. In the old days, there was people had their groove. The guys ran a certain way around the Speedway, a certain groove, and did it consistently. But you had to do that to be fast with a flat bottom.
Right. There definitely wasn't any type of power steering or anything like that.
No. It was grip it and rip it,
That so then you're done with the family race cars. They're gone. That era is over. But the best was really yet to come, sort of. You go to May the following year, and you're fast in Fletcher's car. And you were fast all month.
Right.
What was that like, going from a guy who was working so hard to make the race to all of a sudden now you are starting to have a legitimate shot set on the front row of the pole?
That was a different world altogether. But we had practiced out at Ontario with it, and we knew we were going to be fast coming into May, and we knew with a little bit of luck we could get there. What hurt us more than anything is we did very little practice during the month. I practiced maybe 3-4 days, at the most, and I'm not talking full days of practice. Going out, running maybe 5-6 laps, bringing it in, putting it away, because we didn't have a second car. We had the car, and that was it. And we had a couple of engines, and but the car, a PC7 that Bobby Unser drove the year before in '75, it was just quick. And we had an Ed Pink motor, and Ed Pink at the time was a pretty good engine builder, and he'd come up with some fuel injection for the motor that was a little different than anybody else, and it gave us a little bit of an edge, and we utilized it. And I feel today that had we had a good qualifying day, the day we qualified, the Saturday of 1980, was a horrible weather day, and actually when we qualified, it was gusty and windy, and it was probably the worst 4 laps I ran the whole month. Was my 4 qualifying laps, and I was, in that aspect, I was very disappointed in my run, but we ended up being 4th. But in reality, I feel we should have been. I don't think we could have beat Rutherford in the Yellow Submarine, but we should have been 2nd. We should have been in the front row, definitely, but we didn't. 4th was good. I was happy with that, and it was a different world. It was on, being at the Speedway, capable of winning, capable of running fast with anybody, is a completely different world than trying to make it in the race. So
yeah,
it was quite the experience.
And then, did you have a chance to lead any of that race? I know you ran the top 3.
Yeah, we ran 3rd for most for a lot of it. No, we never got a chance to lead. We could have led had we not pitted with the group, but we had elected to do whatever Johnny Rutherford did, that we were going to do the same. We mirrored him. When he pitted, we pitted, so forth. And that was our strategy. And so our strategy, we knew Johnny was going to be the one to win. He was going to be the guy you had to beat. And so the only way you were going to beat Johnny was hopefully put enough pressure on him to make him break, because you were not going to outrun the Yellow Submarine. You just was hopefully to hang with him and try to make a mistake. And we made a mistake on the other end, So it didn't quite work out the way we planned, but that was our strategy.
And then from there, now you didn't drive for Bob much after that. I
drove for Bob we ran Milwaukee. We finished 6th at Milwaukee. We ran Michigan, and I don't know, buses obviously didn't do very good at Milwaukee, at Michigan. And then pretty well Gordon Smiley came in with a money package, and I was out looking in. So that was kind of the end of my competitive racing. After that, it was just kind of jumping back into cars to make a race, make $1. Never got a good competitive ride after that.
Yeah. Did you make it 2 more times after that, or once?
One more.
Once
with Hoffman's. Yeah.
Yeah, and which was a great story, really.
Oh yeah, it was neat being with Gus, the old timer. Yeah, we were friends and had known Gus. I had known Gus since I was, probably young enough to walk into the pits. So it was great to drive for Gus and Dickie, and to really get to know the Huffman family more than I knew them before. And they're a great racing family, and a great bunch of people.
I tell a story once in a while. 1980, toward the end of the season, your dad asked me if I wanted to go to the USAC sprint car race to watch. So I'm 10 years old, and your dad and Gus Hoffman were my babysitters for the day. So how that goes is we get to the racetrack, and they say, okay, well, just meet me back here at this time. And I just had to run to the place after that. It was a great day, though. I had a great time. But I was sure that. And then on the way home, they're telling stories and just laughing, and it was a good day. I just always remember that.
Yeah, my dad and Gus got along very well together, and they enjoyed one another's company. In '78, when we got to go to England to race, we actually took a trip over into Germany with Gus and his wife and mom and dad and my wife and myself. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed Gus all the time. He's just a great person.
Yeah, he always, I didn't know him that well, but he always reminded me of your dad because they always were laughing. If you heard people laughing and joking, and typically that's where they were,
Well, yeah, because they were always the last two guys to leave the racetrack.
Right.
There was always a cooler of beer in somebody's car. And
that's right.
And it was either Gus Huffman or Carl Gilhausen was the last ones to leave the sprint track. So
it's funny how things go. You like you said, I think 85, or was it 85 or 86 for Hoffman? 85.
84.
84. Sorry.
84.
And then the last time that you tried to run the Speedway was actually the only month of May I ever got to work on a car during the month. And you had an 87 March, which may be one of the worst race cars that's ever been built. People, and there's like a whole thing of talking about them, talking about what an ill handling race car those were.
It was probably the only race car that I felt like I didn't know how to drive. Yeah. I just felt like I was 15 years old and I didn't know anything. And I never had anything so evil in my whole life.
And I mean, they worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And, I know you were getting setups from Watson and them with Wilkie's car and when Pancho Carter was running for him.
Yeah.
And just different people tried to help, and there was just nothing helped. I remember standing, again, this is the only year I ever got to do this, standing out there with the pit board and watching that thing come off 4, and the front wheels are full lock. I mean, for an Indy car, you could visibly see it pushing. And to see an Indy car, to be able to visually see an ill-handling Indy car, that thing has got to be bad.
Yeah, it's scary.
Oh, I bet.
It's as you know, Scott, we ended up putting that thing to rest in pieces.
Mercifully,
we killed it, and then we couldn't run anything speed with that. Then we got that Lola from Dick Simon, and within 2 laps we ran 210 and stuff, and so it was like back in the old days, but ran short of engine in time to make the race. But
yeah, we got put together by Sunday. Last day of qualifying, we got to go out, and all of a sudden, we're 12 mile an hour faster, and we've been all month. And Dick was so nice. They took all. I think he had all the spare parts from all of his cars. Had parts from the Provimiville livery on it, and I don't know what other liveries he had. It was several different colors, and he sent that mechanic down there at Gilbert.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a Frankenstein, man.
Yeah, it's a shame we didn't have one more day.
Yeah, absolutely, because we'd have made the race. I think if we'd have had 4 more hours, I think we could have had a shot at making the race. And so anyhow, at least we got to leave. And that was the last time I ever ran the Speedway, and so got to leave. At least I felt like I was competitive enough to get back in the race if I'd have had something. But so. It's the way it is. It's the way she ended. But I'm glad that March is gone.
Yeah, I'll never forget that guy come over wanting to buy it. I don't know if you bought it or not. That because they had one that chassis was driving that was similar to it, but theirs was heavily modified. I think.
Was
From
it?
what I think was a lot different than what that one was.
I don't know what was wrong with that car, but there was something wrong with that car.
Yeah, it was awful.
Never did figure it out. And today, every once in a while, I'll wake up and think about that thing and try to figure out. But I don't think there was any fixing.
No, you did the best fix job you could do on that.
Yeah, right. You know, and actually, that's the only race car I ever spun the wrong way. You know, that thing didn't spin to the left; it spun to the right. Which today I've never figured that out.
So instead of the back coming around, it come around like that.
It came around. Okay. From the right to the left instead of from the left to the right, which is normal. Right. Mm-hmm. It spun from the right to the left. It spun backwards.
In the I remember the newspaper the next day had that photo.
Oh yeah.
Because it was sponsored by Subway, or that Subway franchise, and it was hand painted. And so the Subway was perfectly imprinted on the fence where it hit.
Yeah.
You could read Subway on the
Subway. Yeah, see, and Subway didn't even give us any money for that. That was all that free advertising.
All that free advertising.
Oh. I hung it out there just for them, see.
That's right.
Yeah.
They give all that money to Jared, and you didn't see a dime.
I didn't see a dime of it. No.
So at that point, I mean, you're like you said, your competitive career is done. I mean, and then you entered the business world with your brother. Kind of talk about what you guys are doing now.
Well, we started back in '87 with actually I had driven a race car for a guy that was kind of an entrepreneur, inventor type gentleman, and he had come up with a fire retardant. And me and my brother, obviously, I was looking for something to do because I knew my racing days were pretty well limited and was coming to a close. So we decided to take the fire retardant and market it. And we got the worldwide marketing rights for it, and did that for about 4 years, and then ended up getting other products, spill control products with polymers based, and we ended up having a company. We do environmental spill control products. We manufacture those. We manufacture fire retardants, and made a company out of it, made a living out of it. So still working it today.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I know you guys have worked so hard at that and tried to find new uses and new things. And when we had the shop, you guys always have all these different ideas and things you were trying. We always enjoyed that. That was fun.
Well, you always got to keep thinking. You got to keep twisting that box open and seeing what's inside.
That's right.
I've never lost that from the racing side. That's one big thing I enjoyed about racing was trying something different and new and seeing what you could develop. And this business kind of fit right into that philosophy, and it's been a lot of fun in that aspect.
As life goes full circle, Spike now helps my brother and his son race. And you guys have done that now 3 or 4 years, and you get to go to the races whenever Chris can go. And I think you guys have a good time at it. It seems like it. And
yeah, it's enjoyable. I mean, midget racing I've always felt midget, as far as pure racing, I think midgets put on the best shows and is the best racing there is. And I still enjoy watching a midget run, and I enjoy watching Chris run. Chris is getting pretty good, and it's just a shame we can't get him a motor. You can't get a motor that's to get him up front, get him competitive with the national boys. But yeah, he's working at it, and he definitely, I believe he definitely has the talent to get there. He needs some time. He needs some time more than anything. And I'm looking anxious to see, if this new Honda that he's putting together, if it help him get there. So it's going to be interesting. But I do enjoy it, yeah, and because I enjoy the Bowie clan to begin with.
Well, I mean, honestly, I remember the thing I remember about that month of May is that, and I will leave names out like car owners and stuff like that, who I didn't really care too much for the car owner, But
Yeah.
I think I made $100 for the month of May, and I was probably overpaid. I mean, truthfully. But
Well, you made 100 more than I made.
yeah, there you go. But I will tell you this: being able to walk in that garage every morning and see your dad, and see you, and see Junie, and being around your family. I mean, it was priceless to me. I mean, I and your dad and I we'd laugh and joke all day.
Yeah.
And I don't know why he and I always had this great and I'm not saying I'm the only one, but he and I always had, even though I was so much younger than my rest of my family, we just always had this great relationship.
Well, yeah, you did. And I believe because, Scott, you got the gift of gab. More than the rest of your family does. And
a little bit.
See, Spike, when we originally started starting this podcast, I originally told Scott I was going to have to give him a shock collar. So if he started talking too much, I could zap him.
Yeah, there you go. But you fit along with Dad's personality, so yeah, you guys were a pretty good fit.
Yeah, no, it's a thing where there are times I think about if I was able to be a little older and been around him, it would have been really interesting, just that dynamic. But
yeah,
but that's how it is. Aaron has a set of questions he tries to ask all drivers who've run Indy before.
Okay.
And actually, Spike, you're our first as this run Indy, so this is kind of a first deal. But so obviously you drove an Indy 5 years. You tried to make it many years. You raced for many years. Was there ever any driver that you raced against so you were, I guess the proper term would be starstruck, like you just kind of in awe that you were racing against them?
Well, I raced against the best, in my opinion, that was.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You have Foyt, Mario, Bobby, Al, all of the guys. Starstruck? No, not really, because I watched all these guys come up from nothing.
Sure.
I remember AJ when he was just starting out, and I was a pretty little boy, but I remember him starting out, and Al and Bobby, watched all them in sprint cars and stuff. So I wasn't starstruck, but it was a great honor.
Oh, I bet.
To get out and race with those gentlemen and to run wheel to wheel with them. And it was a great honor to do that. I'll always cherish that time.
Okay, so this is kind of an open question. This is a question that we're going to ask everyone that we interview that got a chance to drove at Indy. What does Indy mean to you?
Well, when I initially think about Indianapolis, what always comes to mind is it's hardship, and I don't mean hardship like it was painful or anything. It's hardship in the point that place is unbelievably hard to try to master. Unlike any other racetrack I've ever driven on, it's got its own living, breathing personality, and it's hard to be successful there. And I take my hat off to anybody and everybody who has been successful there, because it is a difficult place. But that being in hand, it's probably the most unique racetrack in the world, and I hope it lasts for another 100 years, and I think it will with the right people. So I'm just grateful that I got the opportunity to run it and be involved with it.
Cool. And so obviously, before we interviewed Jagger Jones, we talked to Flynn Lazier, and they were so obviously now a big part of racing is fitness. Jagger was talking about lifting weights. I think I know his brother's doing like UFC fighting now, but in lifting weights and all that. He does mountain biking. And by the way, we're going to get Scott on a mountain bike here pretty soon.
No, we're not.
We're talking about social media. I think we just make a YouTube channel, Scott, called Scott Bowie Does Stuff. So obviously now, like I said, exercising and fitness is a big part of racing. I mean, Tony Kanaan does like triathlons. Back then, what did you guys do for fitness or to stay in shape to be able to drive those cars?
Well, it's basically, I try to work out 3-4 days a week, but I mean, I'm not saying days. I mean, I work out an hour a day, try to stay pretty well fit. But actually, back in those days, you kind of drove yourself into fitness. At the beginning of the year, you used the first 3 races to get your strength, to get everything, the core the muscles that you needed. As the G-forces started increasing throughout my career, because I went from flat bottoms to ground effects and so forth. So I came up to that progression. So our cornering speeds became dramatically higher. And so the biggest thing I used to do is I used to put my helmet on and actually lay on the floor and watch TV and hold my head up for an hour, 2 hours with my helmet on, and to strengthen my neck muscles, because that was the toughest thing to keep your head upright. And there's nothing worse than having your head falling over in the middle of a race and trying to race with your head sideways. So that's probably the biggest thing, was just strengthening neck muscles and that type of thing.
That's funny you say that, because now there's places like Pit Fit, and they have exercises that are, kind of like what you just explained, but a more streamlined method, I'm sure.
One thing I want to say before we ask Spike our final question is we talk about your dad a lot, and we haven't mentioned your mom. And as I've said a million times on here, the mothers, or people will hear me say a million times on here, the mothers in the sport of auto racing are very important. The mothers of the drivers and that sort of thing. And I just want to, say your mom, another just amazing person, kind person, somebody I love being around. And I just want to make sure I mention Marge, because, boy, she, it takes a lot to go racing the way you guys went racing. So I just want to mention her. And here on Racer to Racer, our final question, we'd like to give our guests a chance to speak on a subject or a person or something maybe we haven't touched on, or we kind of barely touched on, maybe somebody that inspired them or somebody that really maybe meant a lot to them. Is there anybody or anything that you would like to, talk about?
Well, I tell you, I mean, besides my family, which is the obvious choice, my parents were a big thing in my life, and racing kept us close, kept us connected, and I'll always cherish that. As far as an influence in life, I have to say the one guy out of all the racing people I've known is probably your dad, Eddie. His philosophy, his way of looking at things, his way of attacking problems, and so forth. I still today, I will run into problems in the company, and I'll say, now, what the hell would Eddie do? And I'll sit back and I'll think a little bit and come up with an answer. And so, if you say of influence, Eddie was a big influence in my life, and God, I enjoyed all the years that he worked on my race car, and I hope he enjoyed the years I drove for him. And he was a big part of our life, and obviously because he was around a long time. And
you guys have a different relationship, obviously, than Dad and I even had, because that's a relationship, and it was a long relationship in racing terms.
Absolutely.
But you're a crew chief, and that's what guys were called back then, because he was chief, as everybody called him, right. Because he's the one kind of in charge of everything. But you and him have to be able to work together, and that relationship's obviously way different than my relationship with my father.
Yeah, I mean, it's the one thing race drivers have to always trust is the person that's in charge of tightening the bolts and right. all that. And whenever you sit in that race car, you've got to know 100% that everything is the way it's supposed to be. And when Eddie was working on my cars, I always felt very confident and never worried about things falling off or just going bad. Yeah, we have mechanical problems, but to no fault of Eddie's by any means. He was a good inspiration in my life. I enjoyed our time.
Here's a question I'd like to ask you, because I told this to Bill the other day, and I think I said to Vic, because Vic's been at the house a little bit lately, and in your opinion, do you think Dad really liked the racing, or do you think he liked the challenge of it?
I think he liked the challenge of it.
That's my opinion too. The older I've gotten, I look back now, and I don't necessarily think it was the racing that he necessarily enjoyed. I think it was the challenge of problem solving.
He coined a phrase in 1978 at the end of the season pretty well. We didn't have a lot of good finishes. I don't think we finished hardly a race that year. But the races, we ran all the races. We were running up front in almost all the races, and we were competitive. And Eddie coined a phrase one day in the garage, and he looked at me and says, we've done so much with so little. We are not qualified to do anything with nothing. And I said, that's perfect. And that fits your dad. And that's just the way it is. I mean, because you have to understand, we used to work on the cars all day. Eddie'd stay and build the engines at night. 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, you go past the shop, he'd be in there building a motor. Working man I've ever met. And he was amazing.
Yeah, he was. He could go and go and go and go. It was pretty impressive.
Absolutely.
I do remember a lot of those days. And like you said, there were so many race cars. I mean, at one time there was so many race cars. Like today, Keith Kuhn shows up. He's got 8 or 9 midgets. It kind of didn't seem like a big deal today. Well, back in the 70s, when you got 2 champ cars, 2 Indy cars, a couple of midgets, a couple of sprint cars, and you're trying to keep all these things going, they're not going to the same racetrack. They're going all over the country.
All over the country, yeah.
And
we used to always ask Dad, how come you got so many? He said, you can only watch one car at a time. You can't go to 2, 3 racetracks at the same time. He said, I don't know. I just like them. Just got them.
Yeah.
So, okay. Can't argue with that philosophy, so what the heck.
So when your dad was done racing, you kind of alluded to me one time, he just took some of the parts and like engines and that and just took them to the junkyard?
Yeah, he threw away a complete 270 Offie in the junkyard in Jasper, Indiana. And because he was tired of it sitting in the garage.
Because he was done. Because he was done.
And then when we got totally out of racing, he loaded up his El Camino with about 5 Offie engines, and he left one Saturday morning. And when he came home, there wasn't a part left. So I don't know where he took him. He sold them. I know Sonny Myers bought some of it, and he just went out there and had a garage sale in the back of his El Camino selling Offie parts. And that was it. We closed shop.
It
was
amazing.
a sad day for it, but it was, that's why he got in it, so he might as well get out of it that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say he just came in and when he was done, he just left.
Just left. That was it. So it was a pretty I don't know how to term it. It was just an interesting life with him, and I miss him to the day. So I always will.
Yeah, I miss him too. He was such a good man.
Yeah.
Well, Spike, thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Like I said, I've known you literally my entire life, and you've put up with me along with everybody else who's had to put up with me. So I again just thank you so much, and we'll be seeing each other for many years to come.
Absolutely, Scott. You take care of yourself. Thank you for the invite, Aaron. It was nice meeting you.
It's good to meet you. Do you go out to the track a lot in May, Spike?
Yeah, I'll go out qualifying and some practice days. Hopefully see some of the guys in the old days. And I'll go to the race. I like the race. Can't miss it. So I still get around. So it's enjoyable, gentlemen. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Spike.
Spike. Greatly appreciate it.